It's certainly a pleasure to see all of you today, and welcome to our new study. Today we want to begin a study of the book of Jacob. I do probably call it James, but it actually in the original is Jacob Jacobos, in case that bothers you. James is sort of the way we use language, you know. For example, if you were to study this morning in Buenos Aires, they would be talking about the book of San Diego, or Diego. St. James, they say San Diego, but we say Diego, and so they wouldn't know who James was if they were to meet him. I'd like to begin by reading from the book of Acts, chapter 1. All of you are familiar, I'm sure, with the background of the family of Jesus. Normally very supportive, particularly his mother. But there was a time that we've already seen in the book of Mark where they get concerned about him, and they come actually at a certain point to see what's up with him. And he has to make that famous statement about, well, who are my mother, my brothers and sisters? They are the people who are interested in the things of God, or they're interested in God's kingdom. And not at all, I think, disparaging his natural family, because he's very grateful for them, I know. And particularly his mom, who still gets great respect today in many quarters, and probably should in more quarters. But anyway, there was a time when they were concerned about him, and so much so that they wondered if he was really on the right track. The book of John tells us, in John 7, that the brothers of Jesus did not believe in him. But things change. They change powerfully sometimes. If you read 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 7, it says there that he appeared to James. Jesus appeared to James, his brother. A special appearance of some sort, then to the rest of the apostles. What's that all about? Why would he appear to James? Why would he come to this one brother in a resurrection appearance? Well, he reaches out to them, as he does to us. And so even if you at one time were not a believer, doesn't mean you're going to be excluded forever. You can still approach the Lord. So in Acts chapter 1, there's an interesting little section. A whole group gathers together there, and there's quite a number of them. And it says, beginning in about verse 12, after they had returned to Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, which is about a Sabbath day journey off, they entered into the upper room, and we've heard a lot about the upper room. It's a symbol of devotion, because a lot of prayer went on there. He mentioned several people that were there: Peter, John, and James. Of course, this would be his brother. That's also Jacob, by the way. But you will not be disfellowshipped if you call him James for the rest of your life. That's fine with me. Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew. And then we have another James, the son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot. So the Zealot, Simon Hos Zelotes, has not given up on the cause yet. He hasn't gone out and decided that assassination is the best way. And then we have Judas, the son of James. So we have a lot of James around. These were all together with expectantly, with one accord, continued in prayer. That's why we call it the upper room, because a lot of prayer went on there. That may say something, you know, about the nature of the environment of the church. You know, it's kind of a prayer thing. It's not a chore. It seems to be something they enjoy. And notice who's there as well. Women, of course, praying too. And Mary, the mother of Jesus, is there, and his brothers. Well, so here we have a big change going on in the life of these people. And one of the people mentioned as a brother of Jesus, who becomes quite prominent as a believer, particularly in the Jerusalem church, is our friend Jacob. Now, from now on, we're going to call this the Epistle of James, but I just kind of wanted to do this a little bit because I don't know if he would answer to James if you were to call him, hey, James, would you come over here? He'd probably just keep on walking, but it's okay. Names. What is it Shakespeare said about names? What's in a name? A rose smells just as sweet by any other name. Although if you called a rose bologna, I don't know if it'd smell good or not. It might not. Okay, now this thing has a mind of its own, so I've been told to relax. Okay. Relax and push it with relaxation, okay. I want you to imagine, if you will, that you're a Jewish Christian and you live in Alexandria, Egypt. And of course, Alexandria is a great site of Pharos, one of the ancient world's 7 wonders, the lighthouse at Alexandria. And that's a replica of it. Really, it's not standing today, as you can imagine, but it was pretty important for navigation. So he lives in this town, we'll say. A big Jewish community there, and a lot of people were there from at Pentecost when the Word of God went out and they responded. People from all these nations. So let's imagine that there's a group of Christians there, Jewish Christians, a Messianic community, and they're meeting. And someone says, comes up to one of them there, maybe works in the lighthouse, I don't know, and says, hey, we got a letter. We got a letter from Jerusalem. It's from James, the Lord's brother. Oh, really, James? I remember him when we were down there. Yeah, he's a really neat guy. Interesting fellow. So what's he want? But it's kind of a letter to encourage us. Well, we're going to read it Sunday. We're going to, show up and we'll read it. So this is kind of going on in a lot of places because it's a general epistle. A general epistle differs from a particular congregational epistle in that it's not written to one congregation. Like Ephesus, Ephesians, Philippians, Galatians, most of all of Paul's, right, or Philemon, one person. Colossians to the Colossian church and so forth, Romans to the Romans, et cetera, right? Thessalonians to the Thessalonians. But for James and for several other writers, including John and Jude, there are general epistles, they're called, because they kind of go out broadcast everywhere. Not that the others didn't eventually, but these started out as more general letters. And so I'm just saying maybe Alexandria, Egypt, and the reason I'm picking that is because this is where the Septuagint was translated. Ptolemy, the Greek ruler, one of whose descendants is the famous Cleopatra, who's not an Egyptian but a Greek. And the whole Greek dynasty had been ruling there since the time of Alexander the Great. But there were men, one of the Ptolemy, I think the 12th, was a big man of science, so he has a lighthouse built. But he also has this fabulous library. It's not there now, it got burned down in the 7th century. Blamed the Arabs for it. Because they didn't really like all those Greek books, so, they were kind of blasphemous to them. So this beautiful library was destroyed by a huge fire, roughly the 8th century, somewhere around there. Too bad, but it's gone. And maybe these guys worked there. I don't know. But the thing I'm trying to get you to do is it goes out to the whole Hellenistic world, because the Jews are everywhere. And a lot of Jews have been converted and are Christians at this time. So they get this letter and they're going to get up and they're going to read it. So it's going to be very interesting. And for them, of course, it's the Epistle of Jacob, but we'll say the Epistle of James. That's perfectly fine. And there was a couple of pictures of James. Now, as you all know, nobody really knows probably exactly what he looked like, so people like to come up. This is out of the Byzantine tradition. And if you can read Greek, you notice in the back very dimly there's the word Jakobos, or Jacob. It's kind of a bit hard to see, but I don't know if he looked like this or not. Maybe he did. He was a male, so that's close, all right? So people try, So this is how it starts. I love the way the complete Jewish Bible translates it. It gets about as close probably to the way the Jewish Christian would have felt when they started reading this. Yaakov, a slave of God and of the Lord Yeshua the Messiah. This really kind of catches the flavor of it very well, and that's kind of what they're picking up on. To the 12 tribes of the diaspora, shalom. Well, actually, the Greek is kairein. It means greetings in Greek, but now Paul would combine these two terms a lot. He'd say kairis, kairene, grace and peace, or we'd say greetings and shalom. He'd put them together. So James decided to go with the Greek greeting. Now, the odd thing about this letter is the Greek is very good. It's not Semitic. And that's bothered some people because they say, I've got a Jew who lived in Jerusalem, write good Greek. Well, you're going to understand that society was bilingual or maybe trilingual, and that they probably, particularly people from Galilee, where James is from, had spoken Greek all their lives because they were living right in the middle of the Greeks, you know. And the Decapolis was right there, the 10 cities, which Decapolis, think 10 cities, get it? Decapolis, from Deca and Polis. Polis not meaning the cops, but meaning a city in Greek. P-O-L-I-S, okay. Now, so anyway, here we have this general letter. So what's it all about? So they begin reading it, and they discover that he is very concerned about them. Now he's writing to them roughly. Now nobody can nail this down exactly, but the most erudite conservative scholars that I've consulted, it's a rather large number, are convinced this was written between 42 and 52 AD. Now that's very, very early. If so, this would make this almost the oldest book of the New Testament in terms of being written. It would be that old. Also, it would impact the audience too, in a way, if you think about it. Because it was written at this time. This is largely before the huge Gentile expansion. So almost everybody's a Jewish Christian at this point. So it's going to flavor, I would think, the letter a little bit too. Because if you're writing more like Paul does, mostly to Gentiles, and he tends to bring in a lot of athletic illustrations from the games, and James doesn't do that so much. But he does have very good Greek, and probably because these people are a little more educated than we think they were, you know. They were a little more cosmopolitan than we can imagine. So this early date, from all I've read, really, and of course, if you read Bible scholars, you can find everything you want. There's even probably some people out there think it was written yesterday in the Waffle House, but that's just the way it is. But I'm talking. The reason I think mainly to Jewish Christians is because of the early date. You don't have that many Gentiles yet, and the Gentile thing will become very huge by the end of the century, as you can imagine. So let's just assume that. And I already told you about his witness to his brother's resurrection. This special appearance may have been behind the belief of the brothers of Jesus, the family of Jesus. And so now you get this person who didn't even believe in him, and to be honest with you, I must admit that if I'd had any impact on James and had known him, I'd say, hey, James, how about putting in a few notes about your brother's childhood? You know, what was his favorite food? Did he eat cereal? Did he ever get a whipping? That's intriguing. You know. Not a thing. They don't ever say anything about anything like that. Now, the thirst for this was so great that in about the 3rd century, there were a number of so-called pseudo gospels written about the childhood of Jesus, because people just had to invent something because nobody else, it didn't seem to be that important. And so you can read some of these so-called infancy narratives, and Jesus is out playing one day, and he's bored, so he makes a bunch of birds out of clay, and then makes them real, and they fly away, and everybody's amazed. They think he's a wonderful kid. So it's a way to impress all your schoolmates, I guess. Another kid gets in a fight with him and insults him, and it's not long for this kid. He's not long for this world. So this is kind of like they make all this stuff up because they're so curious about it. James didn't say a word hard. I mean, there's just so many things you wish he could have said, but he doesn't, because maybe they're just not that important. So that's hard for us because we like to focus on trivia. This is absolutely trivia worshiping time, and there are people that can tell you how many times Britney Spears sneezed in 1932. Well, she wasn't alive then, so that couldn't have happened, but let's say 1992. Let's assume she was alive then. Now, one of the reasons, or one of the very strong reasons that most conservative scholars believe this is written by James, the brother of Jesus, or he's also called James the Just, is that you don't write a letter to the 12 tribes in the diaspora if nobody knows you. And so some other people say, well, maybe it was James the son of Alphaeus. Well, there's not enough, after this chapter 1 of Acts, we don't even know anything more about James the son of Alphaeus. So he just kind of disappears off the landscape. James, the brother of John, Zebedee, was killed by, you remember, and by Herod and Agrippa, and he's not around, so this is really the only James we have of any prominence, and the records pretty well sustain that externally, that he is the one. So I think that's a pretty good thing to go with, actually. It seems to reflect where he is. Okay, so having said all of that, then we have dealt with some ideas about James. So let's kind of turn in the direction of Jerusalem now. And there you see today, if you go to Jerusalem, and I haven't been, I'd love to go, I guess. I'm not sure anymore, you know, but there you see this little sign there in Hebrew and in Arabic and in English, obviously, welcome to Jerusalem. So James picked the city of Jerusalem to work in, I'm going to assume by divine calling, and that was a really good church there. I went through a lot of struggles, as you know, so that by the time James is writing this, he's been through a lot. He understands a lot. I mean, they've had a major persecution at the time of Stephen's death. They've had to kind of scatter, just a few of them left. They've had ongoing opposition from the Jewish authorities. They've also had things going on in the congregation, like Ananias and Sapphira, you know, terrible incident that happened there. And then they had the situation with the Grecian widows feeling like they were being neglected, and the Hebrew women were getting more attention. And not that people are insensitive to that, because it's like they didn't realize it until somebody told them. So that surfaces, and that's where you get your 7 deacons for the first time, right? And they're just servants. Diakonos is a servant. So, and that's from one of those comes Stephen, a deacon. By the way, all the deacons have Hellenistic names, indicating that they're not only going to solve the problem, but show them support for the Hellenistic believing community. Well, these are the very same people that after the persecution scatter all over to Alexandria, to any place in the empire where the diaspora, or the dispersion of the Jews. Diaspora means scattering or dispersion. So James is really super qualified, not only by his experiences in that great church, which had at one time seen thousands of members, to being severely persecuted. So here's a man with a lot of experience and got some things to share. So there's a few things you already know here, but he becomes very strong. And one of the things I admire about James is that, given the fact that some people actually seem to say in Galatians that he had sponsored a back to the conservative law of Moses and be circumcised tradition, that actually James himself opposes that in Acts 15, a very important chapter, where at the meeting in Jerusalem, or if you prefer, the conference or the council in Jerusalem, and it doesn't matter to me what you want to call it, but the main thing is they got together to solve a huge problem of people coming down from Jerusalem, and some of them even saying, James sent us, when apparently he didn't, and saying you need to be circumcised to be saved. You got to become a Jew before you can become a Christian. And of course they had a huge scene over that, and James is one of the people that says we're not going to go that way, and he's get this letter out to all the churches that we're not going that way, but we do want to show respect for our Jewish brothers, so let's, you know, not offend them in any way that so let's reach out. But he did not not rely on the law of Moses for salvation. So a very important figure. So a man with all these kinds of experiences, then, you see, would have a lot to add. Now, there's an interesting note that comes in from another individual who lived around this time. There was a Jew by the name of Flavius Josephus, and he lived in a time of Titus and Vespasian. Vespasian's the dad, Titus is the son. And this is in 70 AD in the Jewish rebellion. He was a general in the Jewish army up in Galilee, and when Titus came in and tried to crush the opposition, he decided there was a pact of 50 officers or more that were Jews that decided that if the battle was lost, they were all going to commit suicide. So 48, I believe, of them did, according to what I've read, and then Josephus and another guy said, this may be something we need to rethink. So right away we know Josephus is a pretty clever guy. So Josephus goes to Vespasian and sort of says, hey, you guys, you won, you got, we surrender. And Vespasian took a liking to it. And so he ends up not only sort of adopting him in a way, but eventually his son Titus will get him a pension in Rome. So he sits down in Rome, and he's living in Rome now, and he's being supported by the government. Talk about a guy who really knew how to do things well. Is Josephus is one of those guys. So he's still around and writes a whole lot of books, and they're called the Jewish Wars and the Antiquity of the Jews. And you can get I've got a whole volume of them from the Loeb Classical Library sitting there. They're all written in Greek, which have been translated, fortunately for us, but this is from one of those books. This is from, now, this is 62 AD, and we know that because we know of the time of this ruler, Albinus, or some call him Albinus, but I think Albinus is more correct. You remember Festus, right? In Acts we encounter Festus. Well, Festus, by the way, is not this country music character that you see. This is the Roman procurator of Judea. And there's a kind of a political vacuum here when Festus dies. And so the king of that time decides to appoint this guy, Ananus Jr., who is a real political zealot, and he's got it in for all these people. He's really got it in for all these people. And so he gets to be the high priest. Well, he's no sooner high priest than Josephus says that he brings before the Sanhedrin that he convened. As a high priest, he had the power to do that. The brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, he brought before them James, the brother of Jesus. His name was James, and some others. And when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. So they killed him. They killed James in 62 weeks, the exact day that this happened. Well, not the day, but the year anyway. And if you want to look that up and read the whole thing, you can go over to Antiquities of the Jews by Flavius Josephus, and you can see. So we have a historical confirmation of the time he died. So that means that he would have functioned in the Jerusalem church from roughly 40 to 62, so about 22 years he worked with the church. So that's good background on him. And so we get down to the letter itself, so to speak. I'm going to put, this is the most Jewish of the translations. I sort of like it. It gives you good flavor. Completely opposite from that is what Eugene Peterson sees. And I'm sort of a fan of Eugene Peterson in many ways. And he's the one that did the Message. And he takes the broadest possible approach. And look how he does it. Hello. Don't you like that translation of Kyrie? Hello, folks out there. Scattered the kingdom come. All right, so. And then probably the New Revised Standard has the most insane, or sort of in the middle. It probably represents the idea here of the Greek about as well as anything. So why mention the 12 tribes? Why not say 2 Christians? Well, I think there's a good reason for it. And that reason is they wants to say to them, you have continuity with the people of Israel. It's not a new idea. This is not a new community. This whole thing is not about breaking away from anything. It's about continuing something, continuing the Israel of God. Don't you forget this connection at any time. Don't let that go. Don't say, well, now that we're Messianic Jews or something or whatever they may have said, that makes us different from Israel. No, it doesn't. You are Israel. And that's a pretty important idea. And Paul even continues that idea in Galatians, the last chapter, verse 6, to all the Israel of God who depend upon the cross. So that's pretty well every one of us when you get right down to it. So we're all part of then that. And we don't want to forget that connection. You know, this is not just some novel idea. So that may be why he's doing this. I don't know. So what's the letter itself about? Well, it's actually has a tremendous focus on the nature of God. Who is God? But it has a lot of practical advice on how to deal with struggles, how to deal with the conflict between the rich and the poor, how you ought to communicate. It's just all kinds of really great Christian ideas. But one of the leading ideas is this one that he calls joy. And right away, verse 2, he says something quite extraordinary, I think. Quite extraordinary. Joy in trials. Now, this is my translation, and it's okay in my book. I mean, well, it probably could be better, but it's okay. And see, my problem is how to translate. See, in the Greek it starts out pasankarein, that is all joy, and then reckon it to be, the verb order is different, of course, than English. But when you put it all together, the idea is totally joyous. Now, I don't have a clue what that means, to be totally joyous, because I've certainly known some joy, and I hope you have, but it's been more episodic with me. That is to say, something can upset it. It shouldn't. You say, well, it shouldn't, Bob. You should be joyous all the time. Yeah, I know. I appreciate that input. But it doesn't happen. So maybe I need to get there. And this is the last thing that I would think of would create joy in me is a trial. What usually creates joy in me is going to see Les Miserables or something and hearing the master of the house sing his song about, welcome, monsieur, sit yourself down, meet the best innkeeper in town. All of the rest, nothing but crooks. Well, why should that make me joy? But for a few moments, maybe I'll listen to a Mahler symphony. That really does it too. Or even the Shostakovich Fifth will do that for me on a good day. But then even some smaller stuff like, say, Mahler's Ich bin der Welt gekommen, it really sends me into a joyous mood for at least 30 seconds. Okay. So I would like this joy, but then James says, let this joy come to you in the middle of your struggles. And it's like, here's what I want to say to that. Huh? How's that possible? What in the world are you talking about? It's the last place you're going to find joy. We don't go to struggles to look for joy. And so there's that kind of contradictory thing here that makes you think. It is the Bible. It makes you think. That's pretty good because not much makes us think anymore. So what's he trying to get at here? Well, he's actually saying something quite audacious, isn't he? It's like, you're in the ringer, and be glad you're in the ringer. But I don't know about you. Well, that's an old-fashioned ringer, obviously. Those of you that may remember those, my sympathy. I barely do remember them, but they were such things. And you may, it doesn't matter whether you do or not, but if you've ever been through this experience, you know, it's a metaphor, right? It's a good metaphor, think about it, been through the ringer. It's like a cartoon, you know. The nice thing in a cartoon is Bugs Bunny gets flat, but then he pops right out again. That doesn't seem to happen to us much, but you can get flattened by some of life's experiences. So how is joy going to enter into this? Is it going to become transforming for us? How is this even possible? Well, it obviously is a whole new way to look at life. Now, could it be? How can this be, I ask, okay? Well, number one, I think it means you're spiritually alive. It means if you can't struggle and ask questions when you're struggling that are really ultimate in nature, you're dead or you're addicted or something. You're numb. You've lost contact with reality some way. You're spiritually alive if you know there's a struggle going on, if you're aware of a struggle, if you're able to understand that this is what's happening to you. Because for a lot of people, when a trial or a temptation comes along, it's just an opportunity. For example, I don't have a really new car, but it's among the most stolen. That is this particular model. I don't know why. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I don't want to give you an opportunity. But, but if you leave one of these in your car, for some people it's not a temptation or a trial at all. It's just an opportunity. You're not going to tempt them. They won't even feel a moment's temptation. But the fact, if you do feel that pull, like, hey, this isn't really right, I don't need to be doing this, or I'm not reacting to this very well, that's a sign that there's some spiritual activity going on in you. It's sort of like when you get a fever, when you get the flu. I mean, your immune system says, hey, man, you got a problem. If you don't feel pain when you know, that's the problem with Hansen's disease. We've talked about that before, or we used to call it leprosy. People lose their limbs because they lose all sensitivity. And so if you lose sensitivity, if you can't detect struggle going on in your life, and you can't detect when you're being put to the test, then you're just kind of spiritually numb and dead. See, so that's a good thing to be thankful. Well, thank God I can still feel. Then it still bothers me. So I pick up the paper and I read where some terrible thing has happened somewhere in the world. Yeah, it's overwhelming. I can't feel the pain of the whole world, only God can, but you know, you can shed a tear, you can care. You can't be so callous and insensitive. Well, another thing I think is you must be doing something right or you wouldn't be having conflict. You know, you must stand up for the right sometimes. People are not going to always like that. They're going to want you to go along with whatever they've got going. Everybody's doing it, and we all know that routine. And then, of course, what James is really getting at here is you learn so much. I wish I could tell you that I've learned a lot from compliments. I appreciate them, don't you? If somebody compliments me, I'm not saying it's all that often, but if it happens, it feels good, right? I treasure it. I don't know if I've ever learned anything from it. When somebody, you know, say you preach a sermon, there's 1,000 people there, 999 walk out and say, hey, enjoyed it. One guy walks in and says, man, it was terrible, it was awful. Who are you going to remember? The 900, right? No way. You're gonna, what in the world did I say that upset him? Why are we that way? Well, it's because we resist learning that way. That guy may have more to say to us. I've had people walk out when I didn't even preach and say, great sermon, great sermon. You wonder where, you know, if they even recognize something. It's just a blur up there in the pulpit, you know, somewhere. But, hey, you got to learn to live with that. Now, the thing is, I'm really trying to get in this because I'm like you. I have my struggles, and I want to start learning from them, and I want to start finding some joy in them. Now, could it be an interesting thing that if James is sort of saying something, you know, as people look at you as Christians, what are they going to see and what's going to impress them? And you say, well, our architecture. Well, yeah, maybe. And Brian sure did a great job with this. I'll tell you, it's fabulous. And so there are people to be attracted to that. I've been to some buildings, the Church of Christ went for years to the laminated beam thing, and every building looked alike, but we were all different. Not too much. Anyway, they didn't come because of the architecture, you know. So sometimes people say, I like the way people dress there, but they could do things for my business. Well, all the wrong reasons. But imagine if you said, you know, those people, they've been through a lot, but that's such a joyous group. I bet you never thought about that. You say, well, it's advertised in the paper. No, such a joyous group. They have all kinds of struggles like you wouldn't believe, but there's a sense there of well-being and equipoise and happiness, and it's sort of a positive, reinforcing. I love being around there, but like getting your batteries charged all over again. I think James maybe has something like this in mind. Everybody's going to struggle, but not everybody struggles well. Not everybody struggles triumphantly and creatively. Maybe that's what he's really getting at. Well, when we think about this, and I've sort of thought, put this together. I created this in CorelDRAW in case you're interested, so you can do it, copy it, and I don't mind. Temptation and trial, it's the same word in Greek, so we don't really know. It's peirasmos. We don't know whether he's saying trial or temptation. And actually, they shade together, so I put them on the same meter. Now, a trial, I think, can become a temptation for you. You know what I mean? Like if it goes on and it can really tempt you to sort of renounce your faith or get mad or slug somebody or something. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the temptation leads to the trial. So they're kind of reversible. And they sort of blend together, and it's hard to say where one stops and the other one starts. But I think the point is, your trial can come to you, and before you know it, it could become a temptation to do some things you don't need to do. So you need to understand the dynamic nature of this. Or maybe the temptation can come to you, and then trying to deal with it over and over again is a trial. So how do you find joy in the middle of all that? Well, sometimes, oh God, he says, the only answer is, of course, I need to add this. This is a little footnote. We often create our own problems. Well, does God not have any sympathy for that? Here's a guy, now, he's created his own problems, obviously. Now, when he gets home tonight, how will he explain this? Sweetheart, you don't sit down on a bench you just painted, okay? Just say that over again to me, okay? Now, you don't know how much trouble I'm going to have getting all this paint out of your clothes. Okay, so we create our own problems, but that's true, but we've got to enter into this creative struggle, I think, and that's what James is inviting us to do. And he says the way to deal with it, when you've got to make that big decision in the middle of a trial, you need more than anything else, wisdom. That's what he goes. He says you've got to have wisdom to deal with it. You say, where am I going to get the wisdom? Well, I just happened to be published, I just happened to have some new wine I put out called Wisdom Wine. And you notice that if you drink me and you will be wise. See, it's right there, right? So how many of you want to sign up for a bottle, okay? I'm going to make it real cheap, make an offer. I want 2 and no shipping or handling. I said, Bob, you're so silly. There's no such thing. You can't drink wisdom wine. It's not something you can just take in like medicine or some pill, although there's people who try pills to get wisdom or other stuff, but it usually works the other way. Well, really, the only source of wisdom is God. Wisdom, Sophia. Don't you love that name? Sophia. Sophia. And there isn't even in Greek. Sophia. Wisdom. So that's why you get the cathedral, you see, that they built Justinian the Great in East Constantinople. Hagia Sophia, holy wisdom. It's converted into a mosque and is now a museum. But anyway, I think you get the point. So who gives wisdom? It only comes from the generosity of God. And so I got to really see James is saying, God wants to help you with your struggles, but he knows that you need wisdom to deal with them, to make the right decisions, and to hang on to him and not let go of him. And you may be amazed at how this works out sometimes. How many of you remember here at Donelson, a number of years we supported a missionary family in Dominican Republic named Stanley and Alice Morgan? Anybody remember Stanley and Alice? Good. I had the occasion to spend quite a bit of time with them, even after they moved over to San Juan, Puerto Rico. So I heard the story. Alice Morgan told me this story. She said, we came to Donelson on a mission visit. That happens, right? And Stanley is walking down West End and he sees a store that says waterbeds. He said, that's what we need, a waterbed. Unfortunately, he didn't buy the baffles that go with it to keep it from being like a sea at night. And it just so happened at the very time that he came and said, hey, honey, I just bought a waterbed, I said back to him, I just found out I'm pregnant. Now, I want you to think for a moment, being pregnant. And of course, this is not experience I know about, indirectly. Okay, but what was it like to sleep on a waterbed without baffles in that first 2 or 3 months of pregnancy? What do you think that'd be like? That sounds great, doesn't it? So Alice was seasick the first 3 months of her pregnancy. I said, Alice, what happened? What did you do? She says, well, one night I woke up and to go to the bathroom, which happened a lot, I put my feet over the side of the bed and stepped into a foot of water. The waterbed that Stanley had not put any padding around, had rubbed against the wood, and it had worn it out, and it collapsed in the middle of the night, and we had a foot of water in our apartment. I said, Alice, what did she do? What did you do? She said, I got down on my knees in a foot of water, and thank God that waterbed had broken. God sometimes answers prayers in strange ways. It's true. But the generosity of God is a constant theme in James. And you notice what James says. Let him ask of the giving God who gives to all. Hoplos means it's the same thing. Simply, no strings attached. Try that with somebody else. No strings attached. And does not chew you out when you ask. That's ungrudgingly. Now, have you ever asked something from somebody and they're like, I don't mean to put the government down. I mean, they've got enough enemies now, they don't need me. They were rated lower than leprosy, or higher than leprosy, or somewhere, I don't know. Lower than leprosy is something you'd like to have. So they've got some work to do there, but have you ever gone in a government office sometimes and tried to get something and had been treated with a certain amount of disdain? Has that ever happened to any of you? None of you, right? You've all had pleasant experiences, haven't you? Or you get on the phone, what do you want, you idiot? You know, just politeness. Now imagine if you prayed to God and God said, you prayed to God and God was irritated by you praying as you interrupted his breakfast or something. And so he said, what, you again? You see, that's the point James is making. That never happens. Now, everybody else in the world may be irritated by you at some point, but not God. That's really remarkable when you think about it. You irritate, you may, what? Kid, what does a kid say? Why, Daddy? Well, just because it is, son. You run out of patience. You shouldn't, but you do. You later repent of it. Your kid comes back to you at 40 and says, Dad, you always treated me so unkindly when I ask you a question. Well, God never does that when you ask him a question. He doesn't treat you unkindly. He doesn't say, what, you again? You bother me again? I even had a teacher one time in advanced algebra. So I asked a question, big mistake for her. She said, what, are you stupid or something? Well, how do you answer a question like that, Yes, and you're contributing to it. So when you hit these situations, then you can't afford to doubt because it erodes all the possibilities God wants to offer you. And James says it's like being out on the ocean, tossed around. And you're like poor Alice, 3 months of this is to really get you. You say, well, you mean is it sinful to doubt? No, I don't believe that. I believe that we struggle with our faith sometimes. But I think that if you let this get the better of you, it's because you're not allowing the wisdom of God to come in there and help you. The God who gives to all encouragingly and without chewing you out is more than willing to give you the wisdom you need to cope with these difficult situations. So if you're not doing that, you're going to fall prey to doubt. And doubt, of course, just really makes you, he says, unstable. So I kind of say, well, let's close out maybe with this idea of a little prayer. May God stabilize our lives by faith then. So I think you can see that the book of Jacob or James is going to be dealing with some of our real down on the road needs that all of us have. So may God grant you the dissolution of your waterbed if that's the answer to your prayers or whatever it is that you need. God bless you all.